So I'll be talking about the role of upgrading of informal settlements in improving safety. And I'll be talking about two projects, one in Mitchell's Plain and the other one in Philippi, both of them located in one of the poorest and most violent parts of the city. So about the research, the primary research questions that we try to address are: how does an informal settlement upgrading intervention impact on residents' perception of safety and their quality of life? Is there a change in the nature and extent of violence after a settlement has been upgraded? And how does it impact on people's perception of safety? So we've looked at settlements that have undergone a upgrading intervention in the last 10 years. We've done looked at three projects, but today I'm only going to speak about two because of time constraints. So the two projects that I'll be talking about today is one called Freedom Park in Mitchell's Plain, which was a housing type upgrade, and it was upgraded into housing, from informal settlement into housing, using the people's housing process. And the second settlement is what's called a reblocking project, where the site is spatially reconfigured, the shacks are reconfigured to allow for services to be put in, basic services like water and electricity. It was mainly qualitative research methodology using focus groups, in-depth interviews with residents of these settlements, the police, neighborhood watch, community policing forums, social workers, community development workers, officials at the City of Cape Town and the Provincial Department of Human Settlements. We also did a community mapping process where we used satellite images of the site before and after the upgrading, and we asked residents to point out hotspots of violence and crime and where they happen and how often. Today I'll just be presenting some of the findings from the residents' interviews, just to also say that this research is being made possible by support from GIZ and also the National Research Foundation. So why violence in informal settlements? So as we heard earlier, that urban violence is one of the most serious development concerns in cities of the South. And the framing for this research is really the relationship between spatial inequality, with informal settlements being the most visible manifestation of spatial inequality and violence. And a report published by UN Habitat in 2011 called Building Urban Safety Through Slum Upgrading identify informal settlement dwellers as being very disproportionately affected by violence and crime as both perpetrators and victims. And it argues that improving safety should be one of the most important outcomes of an upgrading intervention, but yet where improvements in safety have been observed after upgrading interventions, these have been more of sort of incidental consequence rather than a sort of targeted safety program being part of the upgrading intervention. So it's really looking at how upgrading affects violence and people's perceptions of safety. So the first settlement is called Freedom Park. Like I said, it was established in 1998 when a group of backyard dwellers, being fed up with paying high prices for water and electricity to their landlords, decided to occupy a vacant parcel of land that had been zoned for a school. And they lived without basic services, no water, no electricity, no sanitation for 3 years. After children died because of diarrhea and so forth, the city decided to provide basic services first in 2001. This community was very well organized. Safety was a huge concern for them. And when they lived informally, they put specific institutions and processes in place to improve safety, like a marshal system. They were the ones responsible for regulating violence and crime in the settlement. They also had street committees, and they had a neighborhood watch, all responsible for maintaining safety. That's when they lived informally. So going back to this community and after their settlement has been upgraded and asking them about the impact that it's had on their quality of life, people were very ambivalent. On the one hand, they felt that the provision of basic services like water, electricity, and sanitation did make an improvement to their lives. We have running water, we have electricity, flush toilet, dignity has been restored. We can invite people over, we have walls now. We live in houses and not hokkies or shacks anymore. Life was hard in the shacks. We had to get wood to make fire, especially in winter. There would be leaking and flooding. So people felt very positive about the impact of basic services. On the other hand, though, people felt like this reset of our houses actually made them poorer. I'm struggling, I feel poorer. If you don't have money, no job, you'll have to make the best of the situation, but it's frustrating. There's more crime, gangsterism, drug trafficking, children who are unemployed getting into drug trafficking. Some of the drug merchants are gangsters, which increases the violence. The other thing that people also lamented was this loss of community or social cohesion after upgrading. People stood with each other, but the community changed and friendship fell. Community friendliness has changed for worse. We live together like a family, now there's no unity. In terms of the incidents of crime and violence, I know these maps are not very clear, but the one on this side, on your left-hand side, is basically what people depicted before upgrading, and the one on the other side is after upgrading. And if you can see, there's been an increase in the number of violence and violent crime incidences reported by the residents. And these happen within a 50-meter radius of shebeens, and the number of shebeens have also increased from, I think there was one when they lived informally, but the person was eventually evicted from the settlement. After upgrading, they reported an increase to sort of 19 illegal shebeens in the settlement. In terms of people's perceptions of safety, so these are based on, I don't have a lot of time, on 81 interviews with residents. So we asked people, do you feel safe after upgrading? 72% said no. We also asked people, do you feel safe in the settlement? And people, again, most people said no. And this was linked to an increase in gang violence in the settlement. We asked people if they feel safe in their home, and here more people, the majority said yes, they feel safe in their homes. But also there was a bit of ambivalence. So people felt safe in their homes because it provided them with refuge from gang violence. But on the other hand, they didn't feel safe because of the structural quality of the house. So the housing product, very poor, and people felt like it could collapse on them at any time. And there have been incidences where people have been injured due to the bad structural quality of the housing product. When we were doing the interviews, the issue of children came out repeatedly, and people, whether it was the CPF or the Neighborhood Watch, or residents themselves, talked about children and how worried they were about children. And so, in collaboration with the Children's Resource Center, an NGO that's been working on children's issues for a long time, we did some workshops with children, and we asked them basically to draw pictures of what things were like when they lived in the informal settlement. And so a lot of it was about how it was dark, and children remembered the times when shacks caught fire, the flooding, and so again talking about the impact of a lack of services on their quality of life. On the other hand, when we asked them to sort of do a role play of how things are now, a lot of it, as you can see in the photo, about gang violence and drugs and police coming in to arrest gangsters and so forth. So that's Freedom Park. The other one is Sheffield Road, which I said was a reblocking project. A group of informal settlement dwellers living on a road reserve without services or very limited services, 7 toilets, 72 people per toilet before. And then a partnership between the Informal Settlements Network and the City of Cape Town resulted in a reblocking project. where people received more toilets. They also received more fire-resistant shack meat to rebuild their shacks. And the site was spatially reconfigured, so the shacks were arranged in a sort of cluster formation. And this improved visibility and so forth. So here people felt much more positive about the impact of this reblocking. Ooh. So people felt that their circumstances are definitely better after upgrading in terms of perceptions of safety. 80% felt no, they felt much more safer after upgrading. And also people felt that they're safer from violence and violent crime after the reblocking. So people told us my house is safe now and enough for my family. It helps us because there's no crime now, because the shacks are no longer congested and you can see your neighbor now. Yes, it's safe now because people watch each other's houses and now we know each other. And what was interesting for me was in this project, people actually reported an improvement in neighborliness and people watching out for one another, whereas in the Freedom Park case, people felt that this was sort of disappeared when they received their houses. Just in conclusion, so the provision of basic services like water, electricity, sanitation, it does have a significant impact both in terms of physical improvement, but also psychological aspects related to feelings of dignity and recognition. So while improvements in the built environment are absolutely necessary, without a change in broader structural conditions like unemployment and so forth, interventions like upgrading will be minimal and unsustainable in the long run. And in some instances, they might even have unintentional consequences, like a loss of community cohesion, or making people actually feel poorer because now they have to pay for services like water and electricity, and when they don't have jobs, it's very difficult to pay for those services. So in Freedom Park, the provision of the house produced mixed feelings. On the one hand, it provides shelter and protection from violence outside the home, yet there's disappointment with the structural quality. So this study has shown that safety is really multi-layered and it has multi-causal. So there's safety in terms of the structure of the house, safety in terms of the settlement, also safety in terms of the relationship between the surrounding community. And upgrading interventions need to take cognizance of this complexity. And much more consideration should be given to what exactly constitutes a sustainable human settlement and how to create environments in which people, especially children, are safe and where they are able to thrive. I'm almost finished. Upgrading programs should take cognizance of social networks and community cohesion within settlements and should find ways of supporting and enhancing these. And it should be part of a much wider strategy to eradicate poverty and inequality. Thank you.